anything to do with a certain religion, do you think?
No,
Is there anything like that?
No, it's more to do
No.
with a kind of a drug, isn't it? It's a drug.
Yeah, well, those that take it ought to be ashamed of themselves.
According to The Sun, there were thousands of empty ecstasy wrappers littering the floor of the 250-foot-long hangar.
Drugs, sex, sensation.
Some newspapers have called acid house music a sinister and evil cult which lures young people into drug taking. The message is certainly getting across.
The organisers kept the location secret until the very last moment, which was the main reason, according to the papers, why there were so few police here and they were unable to act.
Drug-crazed kids, some as young as 12, boogied for 8 hours yesterday at Britain's biggest ever ecstasy bash.
The party took place here, infiltrated by reporters from the Mail and the Sun.
There's meant to be a drugs-related craze.
What do you know about acid house music?
It must affect the brain in some way.
Unless it's just the music that does it.
All them lights flashing don't do you any good either, do it? I wouldn't even go in the pub where them lights are.
Oh, no,
They drive you mad, don't they?
Welcome to the 88 podcast with yours truly, Wayne Anthony. And on today's show, we're going to have a bit of an experiment. We're going to be deep diving some news articles that were released in 1988. This is part one of a series. Part two will deep dive 1989. But part one, which is coming up shortly, is deep diving 1988. Let's have a look. Here we are on my desktop. Now, there are a few points I wanted to go over before we move on into the podcast. There are some common themes that you'll notice once I start reading out some of these articles, especially some of their headlines. And they're all designed to create like a knee-jerk reaction from the reader, especially parents. They're engineered really to scare parents. And in scaring parents, parents will then demand something to be done. And their solution to the reaction, which the reaction is parents wanting something to be done, the solution is normally to change the law in some way that restricts or limits movement of people. And although people felt that, or at least the people who was given the immediate knee-jerk reactions, for them, they felt that they needed something to control acid house, when in reality, the laws that were being made were to control all parties, from birthday parties to christenings. It didn't really matter, but they used acid house as the vehicle to get parents scared enough that they wanted something done. So there's an emphasis on teenagers, and they're always out of their heads on mind-bending drugs. The ages, you'll notice, are always 14 and 15, and it's again mentioned really quite often. You know, it's to scare parents, knee-jerk reaction. Organisers is a word that's used quite often. And this would indicate, obviously, some kind of organised element. Could be criminals, could be gangs, could be dangerous. And these organisers are obviously earning vast amounts of money, which adds to the element of them being dangerous to society. Noise complaints. I mean, that will surprise a lot of people because MPs had wanted to make noise an actual criminal offence for years. And so they wanted to use acid house as that vehicle. You'll see in declassified documents, I'll do another podcast on that at a later date. But on declassified podcast, you'll see that there's different conversations going on, all surrounding creating laws which would control noise and would make noise a criminal offence. You'll also notice they mention the high courts can't stop the parties. Again, quite frequently, because again, they wanted a change in the law so that the high courts could stop parties, you know, within a few hours' notice, because that was what was missing, that police could turn up at an event, but if we had lawyers that were arguing our case out, then they would have to get hold of a judge to get out an injunction. And, you know, on a Saturday night, 9 p.m., sometimes even later, that was quite a hard task, especially for something of this nature, i.e. a load of kids in a warehouse listening to music all night long. So mentioning the high courts can't stop it was quite important to the propaganda. And again, police can't handle the large crowds, which they couldn't, in all fairness. But this was about higher budgets and, again, tougher penalties on the organisers that were staging these events. There's an emphasis on private parties. Now, the reason why there's an emphasis on private parties was because with private parties, they have stricter laws and stricter regulations. So the police couldn't just roll into a private party and stop it. And a lot of the times, promoters such as myself, we use these laws to actually stop police from coming inside our venues. So we were using those private party laws, and we were adapting them as well, I have to say, because the way that we adapted to these laws was once they started stopping all of our parties, what we then did is to up the game, we then started selling memberships. And so we'd get loads of membership cards printed up. And what we'd do is we'd sell a membership to our club, and then we'd give you a free ticket to the event that was happening, the next event that was coming up. And so we'd encourage you to bring your membership card along with your ticket on the night of the event. And really, this was so if the police stopped anybody, they would have a membership card on them. And so that would help us to justify the fact that we were there lawfully, when obviously most of the time we wasn't there lawfully. I mean, we were sometimes that we had the permission of the owners, but, I won't drag on and rant on. I want to show you some of the articles because I felt like some of these articles would indicate that the government and the media were at war with acid house promoters, and they were at war with essentially with youth culture. And so this is why I wanted to highlight some of these stories, and let's have a look. And I have hundreds and hundreds of newspaper headlines and hundreds of articles, and they were generally all printed between 1988 and 1990. There's lots that came after that, but those are the years that I'm generally focusing on. And let's start. Where should we start? Let's start with the Sun. Now, this podcast is actually a audio podcast. So for people that are just listening, I'm going to actually read out some of these articles and read out the headlines, and so you can follow along with what we're doing. So this is from the Sun newspaper, and the Sun newspaper was obviously the biggest selling newspaper in the UK. It's a tabloid newspaper, and the Sun, this was printed on the 12th of October 1988. It was a Wednesday, and so it's on the Bazaar column. Now, the Bazaar column was the music business column, and it was like the celebrity culture column. And it was a very powerful page. And given that it was on the highest selling newspaper in the UK, there were lots of eyes on this page. And there were lots of entertainers, lots of music business, celebrities and such that really wanted to appear on this page, because whenever you appeared on this page, especially for popular music, that were when people were going into record shops and they were buying singles, they usually found that record companies found that you would sell a lot of records based on this page, what came out on this page on a regular basis. And so it was quite important, it was quite powerful. And these two characters, Gary Bushell and Rick Sky, they were your music business journos. We'll say nothing more about it. But I'm just going to read you out some of this stuff. So there's this page. The main headline on this article, it's an Acid House special, by the way. And the main article, it's groovy and cool. It's our Acid House t-shirt. Only £5.50, man. So here we are. We're in 1988. We've just gone past the Summer of Love, the second Summer of Love. The highest selling newspaper in the UK are now selling t-shirts, Acid House t-shirts. And so if we look a little bit closer, at what the article is actually saying. So this is what it's actually saying. Hey man, have we got a groovy offer for you? Trend-setting Bazaar has come up with some far-out t-shirts to help you keep way ahead of Britain's latest dance craze, acid house. I mean, for a start, you can see they're using all this 60s terminology. It's groovy and it's cool. I mean, that's totally 60s. And you could tell by these cats that they were probably born in the 60s like me, to be honest. But I would say they might be born in the 50s. No, not at all. So continuing on, everyone is talking about acid, as it's known in the clubs, and it has brought back all those old hip phrases of the 60s, which is just a complete lie. No, it hasn't. The media brought all those phrases back. We didn't. Continuing on, cooler, just like our t-shirts. We commissioned the London scene's top artist, Tessa Farrington, to design these exclusive Acid Bazaar tops in mind-bending psychedelic colours. And they're emblazoned in purple with the name of Britain's top pop column across the chest. Yeah, fantastic. The fabulous one-size white baggy t-shirts are made from top quality US cotton and are the very height of teenage street fashion. A similar t-shirt would cost you £18 in London's trendy King's Cross boutiques, but you can get the groovy Bazaar shirts for just £5.50. The t-shirts look great with essential acid house gear like smiley face headscarves, which are £3.99, bandana for £2.99, and cycling shorts for £25.99 from hip stockists fans in London Soho. So, you know, here we are. That's the main article, but there are a few other articles supporting it. Let's skip straight to the lingo. Now, this is quite important. Now, the lingo. Psst. Want to speak like the coolest groover on the floor? Raise your street cred with Bazaar's guide to acid house lingo. I mean, who used to talk like that? Coolest groover? No one spoke like that. So the first one they've got up here is tweet. Yeah, long before Twitter. Tweet. And tweet means very young girl. I mean, what does that even mean? And again, they're pushing across the idea that these parties are full of young 14 to 15-year-old kids. And the reality is, and I have to say, this was supported in a lot of media, TV media journalism. And it just seemed really bizarre that when you watch any of the documentaries from back then, there was always young kids that were the main characters. They were always the ones that were being interviewed, and they were always young kids. And I didn't really see where any of these young kids were because you didn't see them at parties. And if you did, which I cannot remember seeing anybody, if I ever saw anyone at my party I thought were too young, I tell them they have to leave. But anyway, I'm ranting, so I'll continue on with their lingo, which no one used to speak. Okay, so tweet was a very young girl. Then we got sneaker, which is a gate crasher. I mean, we all know what sneakers are in the criminal world. You know, they would sneak into your factory, you know, while you're in there and nick whatever. But the next one is Top Gun, guy who pulls the most girls. I mean, during this time, it wasn't really about members of the opposite sex. It wasn't even about sex. That was on the back burner. Given that we'd just come out of, we were just going into, or we were just in the middle of a HIV/AIDS epidemic. So the sex, we didn't have the option of the free love like they had in the 60s and 70s, because we'd just gone through that AIDS HIV epidemic. So, you know, grabbing a hold of a girl or grabbing a hold of a guy, you know, that wasn't top of the list. What was top of the list was finding yourself, discovering this new you, discovering this person. And so, you know, Top Gun, that was so relevant. And the next one is Smart Groover. Brilliant, which is a brilliant dancer. I mean, no one used that Smart Groover. I don't know where they're getting this from. The next one is tubing, which they've called porking. Don't know what that is. The next one is wipeout, which is a useless dancer. I don't know that term. I think that term comes from breakdancing. A King, Acid King, the DJ. I mean, how is the Acid King the DJ? The next one is Ride the Breakers. be a DJ. I mean, come on. The next one, hang 10, hand clapping greeting. And finally, we have bomb the bass, fuse blowing music. I mean, we all remember the band Bomb the Bass. You know, they were a great band, actually. Tim, really cool. So I was actually dating a girl at the time that I was doing East Side Road in 1988, Linda Lee, and she went and she was part of one of his videos, which was really bizarre. No pun intended. Okay, let's go on to another part. 10 reasons to say no to Evil Lsd. So it is true to say, I cannot deny here, years ago I might have denied it, but it is true to say that there was a lot of LSD around at that time. I should look at the camera, I guess. There was a lot of LSD at that time, and a lot of people were taking these, and they were taking LSD, and that is a fact. So I can't deny that at all. But let's see what the 10 reasons are from the bazaar to say no to Evil Lsd. Okay. Sharp kids love acid music, warehouse parties, and fashion, but they're saying a resounding no to the daft drugs which plague the scene. Here are the 10 things you should know about LSD, which is nicknamed acid and ecstasy. So it's true, LSD is also called acid, but the reason why they're highlighting that again is because we were calling the parties at the time acid parties, with no reference to LSD at all. But so this was another way of them highlighting that, you know, heavy drugs such as LSD was involved in this culture. But let's go back to the beginning of this article. It says sharp kids love acid music, warehouse parties and fashion, but they're saying a resounding no to the daft drugs which plague the scene. What kids said that to you? I mean, who said that? You know, so you just know this out and out lie, you know. So who even uses that language? You know. So number 1 in this list of 10 reasons to say no to Evil Lsd. Number 1, acid acts for up to 12 hours, but the effects that seem pleasant when you're with friends can turn into a nightmare. That's true. That's 100% true. I'll grant you that. It all depends. I mean, LSD is a powerful mind-altering substance, man-made substance. And yeah, I mean, human beings were all made differently. You know, what one person can handle, another person totally can't. So, you know, no one can say it's not going to affect you, your mind in a negative way, and it's not going to have a negative impact on you. And that's why when we initially started taking LSD, because we was taking LSD in the early 80s before the acid house scene came along, we learned how to experience our LSD trips with a bunch of hippies, and they're the guys that really taught us what LSD was all about. And without that grounding, I think that I probably too would have had trouble with LSD. You know, I mean, to go into a club. I mean, when we used to take LSD, that a lot of the time that was like at home or something. You know, it was only a couple of times we ever took it when we went to a club. But to take it at one of the big events where there's thousands of people, lights going, I mean, that to me is not the ideal situation of taking the LSD. But I'll go on. Okay, so number 2 in the list for 10 reasons to say no to Evil Lsd. Many users suffer extremely unpleasant physical symptoms, including nausea, sweating, dizziness, tremors, and headaches. Ecstasy has been proven to cause brain damage. Now, who's to say? I remember at the time, the science departments were saying that there's no telling if MDMA was causing any brain damage, and that they would need at least 15 years to study the effects of MDMA and to study the effects that it had on that generation of people. So in 1988, no one knew whether it's going to cause brain damage or not. And I'm sure there are countries, not just pharmaceutical companies, but there are countries that would probably argue that out. That those countries that have since decriminalized MDMA, and they use it for therapeutic reasons. So, including Germany, Switzerland, Portugal, and there are some other countries, Spain. So there are some other countries that have decriminalized MDMA, and that's allowed them to use it in a therapeutical way. So, so number 3, the quality, purity, and strength of the drugs vary. Remember, these drugs aren't made in proper labs. It means bad trips are common. Now, I personally never ever had a bad trip, but I have been with people that have, and it's not, it was quite terrifying, to be fair. And especially if you're a conscious human being such as I am, if you don't really care about people, if you don't really care about your friends, and the damage it could have on their minds, taking LSD and having a bad trip, then, you're not worth your weight. But me personally, I do care. So when it happened to me, it only happened once. And that one time it was enough to be like, really, really scary. We ended up in hospital. But that's another story for another podcast. So yeah, I agree with everything they said there. Although it wasn't necessarily a common occurrence. Like I know that many people, probably 50-50, I would say the people that I know have taken LSD, some have had a bad trip. Again, bad trips were all really to do with the environment that you're in, the people that you're around, quite possibly the music that you're listening to. It had a lot to do with the influences around you at the time, whether or not you were going through, some, stuff yourself, things that were bothering you, whether or not you had some, things going on in your head before you took the LSD. Bottom line, if you're not in a good space, it wasn't a good idea to take LSD. And everybody knew that from early stages, because it only needed to happen to you once, and then you'd realize that, this is not the one. Number 4, flashback. Flashback experience can occur up to 6 months after taking LSD or ecstasy. If you have a flashback while driving a car, the consequences can be horrific. So yeah, flashbacks, it's quite true. Flashbacks happen. If you speak to the hippies of the 60s and 70s, they will all confirm that, they all get flashbacks. So they've used it in the most extreme moment, i.e. you're driving a car. And because that's another thing, is fear, So number 5, LSD users have died while hallucinating. For example, users who thought they could fly have leapt off buildings. Now, again, this was some propaganda from the 60s and 70s. Now, I could never deny that anyone has jumped off a building while on LSD. I'm sure someone probably has, but but I don't know. I feel like I'm with Bill Hicks on this one, and I don't know if you've ever watched or listened to Bill Hicks and the way he talks about the people that have jumped off of buildings while LSD, and he's kind of said, you should have tried it from the ground first. But I mean, it's not funny, but compared to how many people take LSD and how many people jumped off a building, So number 6. Hallucinogenics are not addictive in the way that alcohol and tranquilizers are, but taking them can develop I can't quite make that out. I think it might say habit because the print is a bit blurred. Okay, but taking them can develop a habit that is difficult to break. Well, I mean, it sums it up at the beginning of that paragraph. Hallucinogenics are not addictive. so they're not addictive. You've already answered that. Number 7, you may meet people who have wonderful experience while taking them. You won't meet people who have had really bad trips. They are in mental hospitals. Granted, I'm sure a lot of people, well, the thing with what I think about bad trips, when someone says to me they had a bad trip, I always ask them if they went to hospital. Because for me, if you're having a bad trip, you're going to hospital. You know, you're going to hospital because you want it to end as quick as possible. And I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we ended up having to take her to hospital naked. And that was quite a difficult time. But that was how important it was for me that I needed to get her to hospital ASAP and get her down, they could use their drugs in some way to get her off of this trip, because it happened to her at the very beginning of the trip. So it was quite scary. Yeah. So luckily she was fine. The next day she went to sleep, woke up, I mean, the story's in my book. It's quite a long story, to be fair, but when she woke up the next day, she was absolutely fine. But there definitely will be people that ended up in mental hospitals. Users of hallucinogenics are easily manipulated. Sexual and financial abuse is common. So people that take hallucinogenics are easily manipulated. I guess they're barking on to like the cults and their use of drugs and the way that they would manipulate the cult members, because that sounds quite a cultish thing to say. The number 9 is bad memories often appear unexpectedly. Depression and violence can follow. I mean, you can't deny these things that they're saying, but what percentage of people actually went through that? I'm sure it was a tiny percentage, 2, 3, compared to the amount of people that actually consume LSD. So I feel like sometimes you have to be a bit real about these things if you want people to take notice and listen to you. And one would hope that, in the 21st century, that we can be more real and can be more truthful about it. And number 10, our panic attacks are common, sometimes lasting for 12 hours. Now, I don't know anyone personally that has panic attacks that were induced by the use of ecstasy or LSD, but I'm sure there are some that have, and so I won't, discredit their experience at all. It happens, and again, if it happens to you, you'll be saying, it's a major thing, but in the grand scheme of things, it was quite small, So not small the experience, but it was small in terms of, percentage wise. So that's that. So that's so we're done. So far, this is just one page. There are people that can see this, but there was another one. Folk gets dancers jazzed up. Well, what's this? Remember we told you about acid house, Bhangra, the weird mix of acid house rhythms and Indian music. Well, dedicated acid house fans are now getting into acid jazz and acid folk. Radio 1 DJ Steve Wright says acid folk will be the thing of the future. I've tried it out and it's great. But it doesn't include getting high on drugs. Whatever Steve says, I'll bring a whole new meaning to blowing in the wind. I mean, come on. So, I mean, the main reason for me highlighting this particular article is for the Acid House t-shirts. This was the Sun. This was October the 12th. And so let's see what happened just a week later in the Sun. I've got it down here somewhere. The 19th of the 10th. Okay, here we go. Right, so this is a double page spread. And this is Wednesday, October the 19th, 1988. It's a double page spread the week before on the Wednesday as well, they were selling Acid House T-shirts. They were highlighting lingo that they made up in the office. Taking the mickey, really. They made them all this up in the office. And so just a week later, so remembering that thousands, well, millions of people read that newspaper. So millions of people would have read, possibly even purchased a T-shirt and the bandana. Remember, they had bandanas too, and they had smiley face badges of some sort. Who knows how many T-shirts they sold? But just 1 week later, after millions of people have read their article, we have this double-page spread, and the main headline is "Evil of Ecstasy, Danger Drug that is Sweeping Discos and Ruining Lives." I mean, discos was a word of the past, so you know that the people writing these articles are they're in the past, stuck in the past. And so just to go over a few of the other articles that's on this page, you could win a free Kylie bra. Neighbour star Kylie Minogue amazed millions of telly viewers by prancing round in a black bra. And it's a great sun contest. You can win Kylie's bra. There's a story about a teacher earning £800 a week. There's a stranger grabbing people on the streets. There's an article about Jack the Ripper. Noel Edmonds also features on the article. But to get into the meat of the actual Acid House article, so it's called The Evil of Ecstasy. Let's read some of this stuff. Just make it a little bit bigger. Here we go. The journalists are Sue Everson, Evision, and Peter Willis. The designer drug ecstasy has become the sinister sideline for evil dealers cashing in on the teenage acid house music craze that's sweeping Britain. There's a picture of a smiley face along with another smiley face, which is a frowning, basically. The popular cry of "Are you on one, matey?" echoed on acid house dance floors from Cornwall to Caithness, is really asking if youngsters have popped a lethal white pill. Are you on one, matey? And while it may just be a trendy, meaningless chant to some young people, the answer is increasingly yes, amongst vast numbers of teenage victims on the lookout for fast thrills. Ecstasy is the street name for the illegal drug menthylloxylene methamphetamine, which I can't pronounce, known as MDMA. It was developed by American psychiatrists to help severely disturbed patients relax during treatment, but was banned as too dangerous in 1985. And what they mean by that is in 1985, in the United States, the drug was put in a Schedule A category. But before that, much like the LSD was being given out to campuses and universities and colleges in the USA legally, MDMA was a legal drug at that time. Well, not necessarily legal. It wasn't classified. And so you could basically buy it. And I remember, I think what came to pass was there was a major trial in America. And I can't remember the name of the chap, but it was an American chap. And this was, again, like 84, 83, 84, 85. And he was advertising MDMA in the newspapers with like a 4-page advertisement, basically advertising MDMA. And in the end, that got up the government's nose a bit, and so they classified it as Schedule A. And so that's what they mean by that. And so let's carry on. Now ecstasy has become the fashionable fix for the 80s kids who want to be with the in crowd and out of their heads. Ecstasy looks as innocent as an aspirin. I mean, as innocent as an aspirin. The fact is, more people die from taking aspirin than cocaine, ecstasy, and crack put together. So how is that innocent? Ecstasy looks as innocent as an aspirin, and a 100 milligram pill sells for around £20. It can produce a 3-day high similar to the 60s drug LSD without the extreme mind-bending effect. I mean, I guess it could kind of have you on a slight high for 3 days, especially if you smoked the next day, in all fairness. The drugs promotes promiscuity by creating a sexual high, but often affects men in the same way as alcohol by making it virtually impossible for them to perform. I mean, come on, mate. So men take a pill and then they just want to have sex with everyone, and then they're not able to perform because it affects their lower regions. New research proves the drug can have devastating side effects, including brain damage, paralysis, heart attacks, severe depression, paranoia, panic attacks, and nausea, which all true, no doubt. And if you read the side effects on any pharmaceutical you can find on the market, they probably all say the same things. Not to say that makes it any better or any worse. Where's the next bit? Even more frightening is the fact that as police raids make ecstasy harder to obtain, it is increasingly manufactured in sleazy drug dens. These dealers have no idea and no regard for the careful blend needed to stop it becoming a killer cocktail. Police analysis have discovered hauls of ecstasy that have contained potentially lethal doses of rat poison, heroin, washing powder, and even embalming fluid. Again, some of that's propaganda from the 70s. They used some of the same stuff when they were talking about LSD and other drugs. So evil. Warnings of the lethal dangers remain unheeded by thousands of teenagers who believe ecstasy is the fashionable thing to take, and evil drug peddlers are ever ready to take advantage of them. A former doorman at millionaire Richard Branson's London nightclub Heaven was recently charged with possessing 2,800 ecstasy pills worth £86,000. Police admit that as the problem has grown throughout Britain, they have been focused on setting up a special detective squad to target the vile dealers. I just want to increase this in size slightly. Kate Ellerton, a writer for the Observer newspaper, was given the drug at a party and described how she ended up rivering naked with a bunch of strangers. She told how she found herself stretched out on a bed with a group of people who she had never met before. And she wrote how ecstasy removed all her inhibitions. I mean, again, this is promoting the fact that these young girls could take ecstasy and get sexually taken advantage of. She told how she found herself loving the people that surrounded her, feeling that they were her special family. Sounded very cultish. At one point, she wrote, the group found themselves forming a naked human pyramid. I mean, does this even sound true? But she, like the other people we interviewed as part of the Sun investigation, also described the terrible side effects, saying that she had become very depressed when the effects of ecstasy wore off. I mean, come on. So, I mean, that's how that ends. And so there's another article on that same double spread, and it's called Don't Be a Sucker. The pushers who sell ecstasy claim the drug offers excitement without danger. They are lying, and anyone who believes them is a sucker. Right. So the dealers are out there saying, hey, take this. There's no danger involved. It's okay. Who says that? Nobody says that. What drug dealer or anybody says, hey, have this? Oh, by the way, I mean, it's not real. It's not living in the real world. The pushers who sell ecstasy claim the drug offers excitement without danger. They are lying. Anyone who believes them is a sucker. Ecstasy is so dangerous that if you take the drug and don't suffer any damaging effects, the pusher has probably sold you a watered down version. Let me repeat that. This article is written by Vernon Coleman. He is the Sun newspaper's doctor. So this is a doctor's advice on this article. Ecstasy is so dangerous that if you take the drug and don't suffer any damaging effects, the pusher has probably sold you a watered down version. So there you go. I mean, propaganda. If that's not propaganda, what is? Here are the medically proven effects caused by taking ecstasy: nausea, sweating, dizziness, tremors, headaches, you'll shake, your heart will beat faster, and breathing rates will increase. Colors will seem bright and small sounds will become loud. You will hallucinate. For example, if you don't like spiders, you'll start seeing giant ones. Here's a classic. So here's another tip from Vernon Coleman, the Sun Doctor. You will hallucinate. For example, if you don't like spiders, you'll start seeing giant ones. I mean, what sort of advice is that? Is that not planting something in your head? Because it just seems like that's planting something in your head. Hallucinations can last for up to 12 hours, so effects that seem pleasant and fun when you're with friends in a club can turn into a nightmare soon after you get home. This can be terrifying if you're alone. The hallucinations is unpredictable. The quality of hallucinations is unpredictable and will vary according to where the drug has been made. Street ecstasy is concocted in illegal kitchen laboratories by crooked and incompetent chemists. Panic attacks are common, sometimes lasting for 2 days. You'll be physically and mentally terrified and unable to do anything about the way you feel. This is coming from a doctor. Panic attacks are common, sometimes lasting for 2 days. You'll be physically and mentally terrified and unable to do anything about the way you feel. Bad memories will come flooding back, and you may become depressed and violent. Most ecstasy users get flashbacks, and they can happen for up to 6 months later. If you get one in the wrong place, you could kill yourself. For example, you may try to stop cars by standing in the road. There's a good chance you'll end up in a mental hospital for life. If you're young enough, there's a good chance you'll be sexually assaulted while under the influence. You may not even know until a few days or even weeks later. So I go over that again. This is a doctor being promoted by the Sun newspaper, the biggest selling newspaper in the UK. This is 1989. And this character is saying, let me go back a little bit. Okay, most ecstasy users get flashbacks, and they can happen for up to 6 months later. I've never had an ecstasy flashback. I think I may have had an LSD flashback, but I've never had an ecstasy flashback. If you get one in the wrong place, you could kill yourself. Do you see the things they're planting in your minds? For example, you may try to stop cars by standing in the road. So you're randomly, bobbing along 6 months after you've taken your pill, and you're going to run and stand in the road. There's a good chance you'll end up in a mental hospital for life. So, you might not just have a bad spell, you're going to end up in a mental hospital for life. If you're young enough, there's a good chance you'll be sexually assaulted while under the influence, but you may not even know it until a few days or a few weeks later. Can you imagine your parents reading this? Can you imagine? And that's who's reading these stories. If you're young enough, there's a good chance you're going to be sexually assaulted and you won't even know. So you're going to be raped, essentially, and you won't know until days after or weeks later. Ecstasy is also known as ecstasy, Adam, and the love drug. I mean, this is just really awful. And there are a few people have sent in, you know, in inverted commas, you know, some readers' reactions. And so this is headlined by, oh, okay. So there's 3 different people that have sent in their views on taking ecstasy. And the newspaper is calling one Pill Potty 1, Pill Potty 2, Pill Potty 3. Here's Pill Potty 1. Horror of my dreams. Kevin, he's 24, car mechanic. Ecstasy affects people in different ways, but I've had a really bad trip which lasted about 10 hours. I'll never take it again, and it was like one long nightmare with no end. I felt really uncomfortable, as if I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. For the first hour, I felt sort of mellow, but later I got dizzy and my vision was blurred. All true. All sounds were completely intensified. I kept hearing frightening tapping sounds and was convinced close friends had had it in for me. I remember being scared and sweating. If someone had whipped me on the back, I wouldn't have felt it. I mean, who thinks about being whipped across the back? You know, strangely, it didn't make me feel horny. I just wanted to get away from people. They all seemed to be making ear-shattering cackling noises. But even when I tried to sleep, it still carried on with really weird, terrifying dreams. I suddenly woke up in a cold sweat, convinced I was being crushed alive in a giant press. I can't say that isn't a true statement. The next one, Pill Potty 2, is Victor, age 23, an insurance broker. You believe that everybody is your best friend. You feel like there are surges of energy shooting through your body every few minutes, which is true. It makes you want to talk constantly and touch people, which is true. You want to get closer to everybody. I've had strange sexual experiences when I've been on E, because you're prepared to make love to anybody, no matter how ugly. Now, you've got to draw a line there. That's absolutely not true. You are mixing this up with people who get pissed or drunk. You know, maybe when you're drunk, you might feel that. I don't, but, you know, chaps do. So that's totally untrue, you know. And if that was the case, why didn't these events just turn into mass orgies? If the fact is, if people were being sexually excited by taking MDMA, why didn't these large parties end up in mass orgies? Or why wasn't there a little back room somewhere? Because we always had VIP rooms. Why wasn't it the VIP room, for example? Why wasn't that a mass orgy? If this was about sex, why wasn't there stories of mass acid house orgies? There was never any stories about acid house orgies. It was only about drugs. So, you know, what are they talking about? So what's this now? You can make love for hours as everything's kind of delayed. But after 7 or 8 hours, it wears off and you feel absolutely terrible, really weak and suffering from headaches. There again is that headaches. That's another trigger word I should put on our list. The day after is always the worst. You feel incredibly low and depressed and have terrible back pains. I would say that the day after is when, and it's been explained scientifically, is when you had that low. And I have to be honest, you know, I never used to get depressed at all, ever. Even now. So for me, that didn't happen, but you was always aware on the second day after that you could, you know, hit an all-time low. You could hit a wall. And so you had to keep yourself up. And that's totally true. But that would only last a day. That would only last until you fell asleep and then woke up again. So one time I was completely paralyzed for about 2 minutes immediately after taking ecstasy. I mean, one of the most serious side effects is that you have no control over your body temperature, which is completely true. In nightclubs, you can sweat so much that on one occasion, a friend was going to call a doctor because he thought I had a tropical disease. I mean, hello. And outside, even on a mild day, you feel really, really cold. Your teeth start shattering and you shiver uncontrollably. It's also highly addictive. The sensation you get makes you feel high so good. The sensation you get makes you feel so good that you can't help but take one every time you go out. And that could be true. But it just seems to zap more and more energy. It leaves you absolutely shattered at the start of the week, just when you need to be fighting fit. Now, that's absolutely true. I mean, you're dancing most of the night, and a lot of people, they weren't fit. They weren't keeping in shape. They weren't going to gyms, doing lots of walking, or they wasn't keeping fit. And so here they were suddenly dancing for 8 hours at a time, and did leave you shattered. It did leave your body battered and bruised and, achy. But that wasn't drugs. That was the fact that you'd just been dancing for 8 hours. You didn't stop, dude. Where are we? Oh, yes. So we're on to pill potty 3. A lot of this I can't read because it's faded out. Okay, touch was too much. Name, I'm not sure. Claire, 25. Job, rock manager. What I remember most about taking it is touching everybody. I got my face slapped a few times in the disco because I couldn't stop feeling and stroking people. Oh, it's a fella. My girlfriend also took some at the same time and kept chatting up all the young men in the place. She kept stroking her hand down their chests and touching them. That made me incredibly angry, and I also ended up with a fight with one of the guys for it. We had an almighty row, and that night, and things were never the same between us again. Blah 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 blah. So yeah, I mean that's this article, and there's a picture of a guy, that looks like he's on his with a smiley face T-shirt, which says "Have a nice trip" on it. So just a week later, we have this article. I mean, just a week later. Now here's another. Pucker Gear. Now the title is titled "The Sun 1988," but I'm not actually sure because although this is from one of my original newspaper clippings, I scanned this years ago. That's why it's a bitmap. I'm not sure if this is the Sun 1988, but it's definitely a national newspaper. Otherwise, I wouldn't have it. And this one is titled Pucker Gear. Now, there's a picture of 3 different people, modeling the clothes. All the clothes are quite horrible, if I'm honest. I can't remember anyone wearing any of these clothes. And that's the reality of it. I'm not dissing the designers. There's a few people there. There's a few faces in there. Joe Bloggs, Nigel Hall, Miss Selfridges even jumped in. Who else? Shelley's, the shoes manufacturer, Dulce's is in there. So what this shows you is that loads of people, loads of corporations were jumping on this, especially the fashion lines, because this is 1988. If this isn't 1988, I know for sure 100% that Topshop, Miss Selfridges, and a few other major stores were selling Acid House t-shirts from early days, so they were selling them from really early. Burton, what's it called? Burton's, the shop. So they were selling, and if you think about it, these fashion lines, they don't come overnight. Lots of meetings have to take place. Lots of designer meetings first they got to find a designer, then they find a designer, then there will be lots of meetings about the designs, then there will be lots of approvals that need to happen. And so these meetings, they go on for months. Sometimes they could go on for a year. It depends on who you're working with and how fast they move. But these things can go on for a period of time. And so for all of these shops, top shops, and all of these shops to have acid house t-shirts and that acid house ranges, not just t-shirts, they had bandanas, they had bags, they had jeans with smiley face patches sewn into them. They had a whole section geared towards the acid house generation, and that was in 1988. So for really quite early they jumped on it. Now this article, for those listening, is headlined Pucker Gear, and I'll read what it says. If you want to dress for success on the rave scene, you'll need a proper selection of pucker gear. Cheap and cheerful is the raver's motto, so choose hippie-style clothes that hang loose to keep you cool in the hottest clubs. The fave rave gear for girls and blokes is very brightly coloured, plain, swirly, stripy or blocked, just as long as it's not all black. Simplicity is of the essence, so fussy frills and designer jackets are considered naff. So are stilettos, girls, but the deadliest fashion gaff for any self-respecting female raver is dancing round a handbag, which was the tradition in nightclubs before acid house came along. Carry a man's wallet to be super cool. A deep tan is beyond the pale. Just like bats, real ravers only come out at night. Now that's a reference to all the Ibiza crowd coming back that winter with suntans. Makeup is either heavy Mary Quant style, 60s eye makeup, or none at all. Clear mascara is a must. A natural pep tonic is full of essential minerals, is available from health shops nationwide, and is a trendy way to find the energy to dance all night long. The last essential accessories for any raver are a whistle to show approval and a fluorescent wand, available in kids or camping shops, to wave to the fudding beat. Fashion styling, Sam Howard. Oh, mate, I mean, come on. Those clothes are horrible for a start. So, I mean, these are just completely made up stories. You know, this is like a marketing department stories. Let's have a look at another article, which will be around the same time. So let's move on. So that was October. Let's move on to the second. What's this one? This one's the 1st of November. So let's go to the 1st of November. Okay. Now, the main headline is Roof Falls In on the Acid House Craze. And at the top, drug fears wipe the smiley off the face of fashion. Drug fears wipe the smile off the face of fashion. The Daily Express, Tuesday, November the 1st, 1988. Now, remember, as far as the trendsetters and the elite that kind of started the ball rolling, for a lot of those lads, they've just done a summer of love. Not just lads, but you know what I mean. They've just done the second summer of love. So for them, they felt like this whole movement was over. And a lot of that is reflected in a lot of these press stories that we see at that time in 1988. Let's go in a bit further and let's read what it says. Right, so the roof falls in on the acid house craze. Its image is wild, wacky, up to the minute, and today's teenagers have embraced it like other generations took to punk or flower power. An acid house, the latest dance and music craze to grip sessions. An acid house, the latest dance and music craze to grip sections of Britain's youth, was quickly taken up by high street fashion chains looking for a quick profit and street credibility. But now they are dropping the acid house fashion theme because of its association with drugs like LSD and ecstasy. Acid house involves hypnotic, rhythmic music set to blinding flashing lights. It's brought with it a trendy uniform of clothes that included t-shirts in luminous colours, badges, shorts, and smiley, the peace symbol of the 70s. Now buyers from multiple stores who are paid to keep up with teenage fashion trends have cancelled huge orders for the regalia. Like BBC, which has banned chart records, Excuse me. Like the BBC, which has banned chart records connected with the craze, they are worried the drug image could be bad for business. Topshop, which is a major chain, retail chain that major stores throughout the UK, but they've got a major store in Oxford Circus, which is just huge. Topshop, a subsidiary of the Burton Group, has already stripped shelves of its Smiley range of merchandise. Chelsea Girl is doing the same, and Miss Selfridge say it took only a limited order but will not be placing further orders. Now, remembering this is the 1st of November, 1988. Yeah. So Topshop, they already had a whole range of clothes, acid house themed clothes. Miss Selfridge had a massive theme. Chelsea Girl had a massive range of goods. This didn't happen overnight. Moving on, Pink Soda, the company that pioneered the image and revival of the smiley logo, said it has got all out of proportion. We thought it was nice to revive the hippie image of the 70s with smiley, which was a symbol of peace. Now, Pink Soda could be, major designers from the time I don't know, but to think that, again, they're connecting it with the 70s, they are claiming ownership of it. I think I was just talking recently in the Adamski podcast, and Adamski was saying it was a chap named Barnsley. Maybe he's got something to do with Pink Soda, I don't know, but he was the one accredited for connecting the smiley face with acid house culture. This is what they say. There's a quote from Pink Soda Company. Our products have no words on them. Then cowboys came along to cash in, copying our logo and adding words synonymous with drug taking like acid and take a trip. So these guys are trying to claim that their smiley faces would their merchandise were just plain with smiley faces on them, and then some dicks came along and wrote acid on them or take a trip. I mean, come on, dude. It may even be true, I don't know, but come on. A media campaign against drug taking identified the followers of acid house music as wearing the smiley logo, thus creating an association with drugs. Of course, nobody could be seen to be promoting a drug image, so even though the demand for the fashion has increased, we have been forced to pull out. Although with all this free publicity, the cowboys would go on producing our ideas and having a field day in terms of sales. And are you saying that you're not going to be doing that? Is that what you mean? All of these t-shirts and stuff that were taken off the shelves, all of these orders that were cancelled, but yet you still have the product. You're going to burn them? You're going to throw them away? I don't think so. The cowboys have already flooded market stalls with t-shirts, badges, bandanas, and hats to cash in on the trend. Now, Pink Soda are suddenly claiming ownership of the smiley face. Of course, there are loads of different people cashing in. Why wouldn't they? It doesn't belong to you. The image doesn't belong to you, so you don't own it. And suddenly, the smiley symbol, which started as a simple smiling face on a badge, has become a symbol for drugs. That's just so not true. Yes, in some ways it could be true. You could say that the smiley face replicated the original MDMA pills that flooded the market in 88 and 87, which were Callis, and they were yellow. So you could argue that point. But essentially, I considered the smiley face not necessarily just representing drugs, but the smiley face for me represented the entire culture in its entirety. So for me, it wasn't just drugs. It wasn't. You didn't see a smiley face and think, "Oh, that guy takes E's." You didn't think that at all. Again, that smiley face came from the 70s, so you'd see people with the smiley face. It doesn't mean they were connected to what you were connected to, deep in that underground. Ironically, press reports about drug taking and the semi-robotic style of dancing that accompanied the acid house image have created the market for youngsters. So what about the press stories in the Sun just like a week ago, 2 weeks ago? What about those stories? What about them creating their own lingo? What about them creating their own t-shirts? Newspapers that were read by millions of people. We didn't have that reach. We couldn't reach millions of people. Acid house promoters, everyone involved in the scene, they didn't have that type of reach. If they did, they'd be a lot more powerful a lot sooner. The reality is it was the media that had that reach, and it was the media that promoted acid house to the rest of the country. That is a reality. The BBC has decided to put a total ban on the acid house sound, dropping all music that referred to acid because it does not want to encourage drug taking. How laughable is that statement? I mean, look, let's be real. All of the rock music made in the 60s and the 70s are made by people that have admittedly were taking hardcore drugs during that period. They all admit it. It's all self-admitted that none of them are denying that they wasn't all on drugs. So does that mean that all of their music encouraged people to take drugs? Is that what it means? Because it doesn't mean that to me, and it doesn't mean that to millions of other people. BBC has already banned chart hits like D-Mob's "We Call It Acid," which is a great track. That for me, and bless him, your man. I know he recently passed, but that for me was where the acid house chant came from. It was your guy, and it was acid, and so yeah, "We Call It Acid" was a theme for. It was a short time, but it was a big theme in the community. Jolly Roger's "Acid Man," which has angered record bosses. Independent radio stations like London City Radio say, "We are keeping very careful and responsible eye on the situation and assessing every record as it comes. We feel blanket ban at this stage is inappropriate." Acid house musicians deny that their music has anything to do with drugs. They say the tag comes from the hypnotic dance beat. And it's true that even some of the pop's squeakiest clean bands and musicians like chart toppers Bros and Yaz have had distinctive acid house style mixes on their records. It has nothing to do with drugs, but everything to do with catchy dance floor rhythms. Now, the reason why they're highlighting this is because the newspapers actually started a anti-acid house campaign, and they used bands such as Bros to promote their campaigns. And so Bros would come out in the media and talk out against acid house when their producers were creating acid house mixes for their tracks. And then they were saying that that has no way connected to people at acid house parties. I mean, come on. The craze has spread across the country, and there is even a movement called acid jazz. Paul Oakenfold, a London disc jockey working the acid house scene, told the New Musical Express last week, "Obviously drugs are involved, but I don't know to what extent. It's impossible to say. I'm getting dozens of acid records in the post, so musically I see it becoming very commercial, but only for a short while. The bad press is going to get worse, and a lot of acts are not going to want to affiliate themselves with acid house. Acid house is a trend like rap, like punk. It now looks like its days are numbered." And there you go. There is another typical quote from some of the pioneers of the acid house scene. And that there's Paul Oakenfold saying practically that it's already dead. The scene had already died, because a lot of them from that summer who experienced that 87 in Ibiza and that second summer of love, to them it was over. It was just, a tiny number of people. I say a tiny number, probably no more than 10,000 people in the whole country, and probably that includes Ibiza too, So there wasn't a great many people that had experienced acid house, and already in 1988, these lot are saying, It's over, basically. I mean, Paul Oakenfold is saying acid house is a trend like rap and like punk, and it's saying its days are numbered. And how wrong was he? I mean, how wrong was that? So that's the end of that article, basically. So, here we are, November 1988. And they're already saying it's over. The Top Shop, Chelsea Girl, Miss Selfridges, they've all had ranges of acid house themed fashion items on their shelves, which they've now removed. And people such as Oki are saying it's over, but it could be just, covering up. Go on, son. So let's look at another one. So that was on the 1st of the 11th. This is the 2nd of the 11th. Yeah. So we've gone from it's groovy and it's cool, it's our acid house t-shirt, right? So the next was the evil of acid house, or so next was Pack of Gear. Then it was the evil of acid house, and now we're here. The Sun, the 2nd of November, 1988. Again, a Wednesday. The main headline: Acid House Army of Baseball Bat Brutes. Can you imagine? Let's move in closer. Hang on, let's read that again. Acid Party Army of Baseball Bat Brutes. They all have prison records. Bouncers wielding baseball bats and pickaxe handles patrolled Pat McCann's acid house parties, it was revealed last night. An associate of the former jailbird said they're all villains with prison records. Nobody wants to mix with them. McCann scares the shit out of anyone who crosses him. He's a very heavy guy. The associate revealed that McCann had set up the acid discos with another heavy. He said Pat uses the alias Arsehole and the other guy calls himself Johnny Cash because of the amount of money they are raking in. A bouncer hired by McCann for £50 a night told how he'd been sickened by the parties, he said. All kinds of drugs are available at these discos, but particularly ecstasy, LSD, and amyl nitrate. It's always called an acid party, and all the youngsters know that they will have no trouble getting hold of drugs. At one disco, a room was specially set aside solely for drug dealing. McCann charges £5 on the door and has made up to £10,000 on one night. 2,000 kids or more are turning up. The bouncer, who asked not to be named for fear of retaliation, added, I got out of the business because I've got kids and my own. I got kids of my own, and it revolted me. The ecstasy tablets are wicked. Dealers cut them with rat poison. I've seen kids sweating like they've got malaria, shaking all over and their eyes glazed. By the end of the night session, they're out of their minds. Many of the girls are no more than 14 years old. I mean, here we go again. How many more young kids have to die before some action is taken? Now, he's talking about kids dying, right? Now, it's the 2nd of November, 1988. At this point, they're not even, MDMA isn't even being recognized as a cause that what some of these kids are dying from. Now, a friend of mine was one of the first people to die in the UK, Gurkhan. He was actually a school friend of mine. And when he died, we'd all been out for the night. He went home, and they say that, he had a home gym and he carried on working out at the gym, went to sleep, and he didn't wake up. Now, when he was taken rushed to hospital and, he was proclaimed to be dead, MDMA or drug taking wasn't on the list. It wasn't associated with him dying. I don't know what they did associate him with, but it wasn't with drugs. There was no way it was like some way connected to a drug. So I'm sure maybe someone had died at this point, but again, it's 1988 and MDMA wasn't associated with deaths. So I don't know what he means when he says how many more young kids have to die before some action is taken. The bouncer said everyone was scared of McCann. He added, even the screws in prison were terrified of him. He's a real hard man coming from a family of 19. He was the king of the Nick when he was doing time, and now he boasts he's the king of the acid house scene. I've done loads of bird myself in the past, and the only bouncers McCann hires are men with records of violence or men he's met in the Nick. I'm no angel, but I don't want to see kids destroyed by drugs. Another former bouncer said drug dealing at McCann's bashes had got completely out of hand. He added, ecstasy tablets are being sold in their hundreds. McCann, who has a greengrocer store next to Harrow and Wealdstone railway station, is currently building an extension to his home nearby. Police described warehouse acid parties as a growing menace, fast spinning out of control. A senior detective said 2,000 youngsters can pack out these places with only a bunch of hard-nosed villains in charge. It is a frightening scenario. I mean, you know, I don't know McCann. I don't know who McCann is personally. And at that time, I'd never heard of McCann. So I can't say I know who he is. But, I'm no angel. Look, these guys, they're saying that they're former bouncers, and they're prison men, hard men, and all this kind of stuff. When what they're doing here is just snitching, basically. It's just grassing, So not only did they find one guy that was willing to say McCann was a wrong'un, they found two that were willing to say McCann was a wrong'un. And it just makes you think, is this them making stuff up? It really makes you question what they've written, And what's this one? There's another big headline. Stars tell kids, don't use this deadly drug. And there's another article on here. It says 4,500 calls to radio helpline. And I can only imagine they must have been calling up to say, where's a party, mate? DJ Simon worked on the emergency bulletins. 4,500 calls to radio helpline. Radio 1 launched an emergency campaign yesterday against the evil of the drug ecstasy. DJ Simon Mayo presented special hourly bulletins warning against the drug. Imagine that, hourly bulletins on the radio warning people about ecstasy on Radio 1. This is 1988. Yeah, this is Radio 1, the most listened to radio station in the country. You couldn't get a better marketing campaign. If you didn't want acid house to be front and center, why were you talking about it so often? Why did you have bulletins on the radio? So where are we? So DJ Simon Mayo presented specially hourly bulletins warning against the drug. More than 4,500 worried teenagers. Now, I'll stop there. Worried teenagers or worried parents? I would say that was worried parents. But they have to lie because they have to drive home the idea that teenagers are being manipulated, teenagers are being abused, and the acid house culture was targeting teenagers as their targets, So more than 4,500 worried teenagers later jammed the pop station's special helpline to get advice from a team of 100 drug counselors. Simon 30 worked against the clock to produce the program for Radio 1's annual Drug Alert campaign. Simo said, it became apparent that we needed to give some information about ecstasy because it had become so popular. Radio 1 is keeping that helpline open for an extra 24 hours. Oh, you're so generous to keep it open for 24 hours extra. Counsellors will man the free number 0800 blah, blah, blah until midnight tonight. Who's to say whether those 4,500 calls are teenagers worried about drugs or asking advice about drugs? Or was that, you know, mostly parents calling up to say, hey, what is this drug and how can I stop my child from taking it? I'd probably say it was that. There's another section here where the sun created its frowny. So we've got a smiley and its nemesis is the frowny. They created this frowny and they created badges and all this other stuff. And when they print stories, they would print this frowny along with it. And you could get your own badge. And by this article, it says the headline is Badge to Beat Evil. And they got this frowny and it's got the words say no to drugs and it's got the sun logo on both sides. So badge to beat evil. Help stamp out the evil of drugs and wear a sun badge. It's bright yellow, like the smiley badge, but with a sad expression. Send a sturdy, stamped, self-addressed envelope, 14p stamp, and you will receive your badge. Write to Drugs, The Sun, P.O. Box, blah, 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 Mitcham, blah, blah, blah. The Sun has withdrawn its bizarre acid t-shirt offer. So they thought, look how small that announcement is. So they had practically a whole page talking about their acid house t-shirts, yeah, how groovy they were, and with their lingo and everything else. And to denounce that, they've given one sentence: the Sun has withdrawn its bizarre acid house t-shirt offer. How kind of you. And there's one more article. Let's see, is it worth reading? Let's have a little look. Yeah, let's read it. I can see Boy George's name was mentioned. Stars tell kids, don't use this deadly drug. The worlds of pop, TV and showbiz joined forces with the Sun last night to beat the growing menace of the acid house cult. See, now, you always know that it was leading there to be a cult. You just knew that they were going to start calling it a cult at some point, you know? Scores of shock stars spoke out against the deadly drugs, acid and ecstasy, after the drug of pill-popping nanny Janet Mayers. Okay, so that someone has died at this point. You know, so I take back some of what I said a few moments ago because I didn't know anyone had died. But I still question whether or not, you know, again, the guy that I know, they didn't associate it with MDMA and they didn't associate it with ecstasy. So I don't know. So, but someone has actually died. So I acknowledge that. So the stars actually spoke out after this person died. Chart star Boy George, a reformed junkie himself, said, I think it's terrible. I'm not surprised that someone has died. I've been to a few acid house parties, and at the last one, I saw someone get knifed. Georgie, mate. Wait, dude. I mean, George came to a lot of our parties. I know you didn't see that at Genesis, mate. Or Genesis, when I was doing parties with Sunrise. You didn't see that at our parties, you know? People think you only have a good time. They don't realize that there is a violent side to it. I mean, granted, I remember, speaking of Boy George, I remember we did Genesis Sunrise parties somewhere. And I remember we were in the office counting the money, and it was a money room. And the money rooms are quite guarded, you know, and the atmosphere could be a little bit tense in that room because that was where all the money was happening. And there was always this fear that, you know, armed robbers were going to come and try and take the money. So it was quite tense in that room. But Boy George, because of who Boy George is, and, you know, he was like one of the firm. He came to all the parties. He'd called my mum and asked for the party's address in the past. And so because of who he is, on this particular day, I was in the money room with a few of the heavies that were in that room. And, you know, I was counting the money, whatever. And I remember Boy George walked in. And I remember the heavies, they were all standing, you know, they were all standing up. And they were big big blokes, And I remember they all turned and faced him. And I remember saying, he walked in and bless him, you could see that he was off his tits, And he came in and he was like, hi, type thing. And the guys just all looked at him in their way, because obviously our security, they weren't on these, they were just being themselves, and they were intense. And so they all kind of looked at him, and he walked in and he closed the door and he went, oh, I'll be leaving then. And he left the room, which bless his cottons. But so he might have got to see some, or he might have, got the impression that, it was quite dark, but the reality is it wasn't. It was the money room, and normally no one's let in that room. So, it's going to be tense in that room. But and the article goes on, and pop heartthrob Matt Goss told Bros fans, I've never been to an acid house club, but my mate went to one and everybody in the place was out of their heads on drugs. Another guy told me someone spiked his drink with drugs. He said the wall started going all wobbly and people's faces started turning green and dripping and everything. Oh, wow. Acid house hero, wee, Mark Moore, wee, whose band S Express S Express recently topped the charts, admitting taking all sorts of drugs. Go on, my son, until he had a terrifying experience. And the reason I'm saying go on, my son, isn't because he's taken loads of drugs. It's because he's being honest about it. That's why I'm saying go on, son. He's being honest, I saw he said that as well, has he? That's weird. They must have been in the same place. Acid house hero Mark Moore, whose band S Express recently topped the charts, admitted taking all kinds of drugs until he had a terrifying experience. I saw a friend gets knifed. That's why we were all high, he said. Ever since I've laid off drugs. I might have got that mixed up then. I might have got that Boy George quote mixed up. Oh no. I thought I got mixed up. No, Boy George is saying it as well. They must be at the same bloody party. Boy George, he saw someone get knifed. I've never ever seen anyone get knifed, I should add. And our boy Mark, who we know if he said that, then it's true. He saw someone get knifed, possibly at the same party. I saw a friend get knifed whilst we were all high. He said, ever since then, I've laid off of drugs. Pushers peddled 2 deadly drugs at acid house parties, at acid house discos. No one called it acid house discos. Ecstasy or MDMA. How is that 2 drugs? That's the same drug, which can cause brain damage and heart attacks, and LSD or acid, a mind-bending hallucinogenic. Okay. Well, kids BBC presenter Philip Schofield said, Britain has always led the way in new music, but the terrifying side of acid is unscrupulous characters who prey on the easily led and the stupidly adventurous. Panorama star Karen Woodward told youngsters, you can have fun without the drugs. We go out and we always have a brilliant time, but we have never touched any of the drugs, but they definitely had a good time because I've seen those girls out and about, mate. But not to say that they were on MDMA, but they most certainly used to get pissed. That's for sure. But anyway, that's that article. Yeah, so I mean, it started off. They're talking about baseball bats. So what have we got here? I mean, there's another thing down here, Mr. Big, but that is taken from another article in reference to Jarvis, actually. But we're getting to that a bit later. So is that it? Yeah. So that's some of the 88 ones. There is a lot more articles, but let's yeah. So that's the 1988 stuff. So I should probably end it there, and prepare for part 2. So listen out for part 2. Hopefully my voice hasn't driven you too mad That was the first time I've ever read out loud since, reading stories from my book to large crowds in 1999. So, bear with me, bear with my dyslexia, and we get through this together. But thank you for staying with us this long, and I'll see you again in part 2.
Anything to do with a certain religion, do you think?
No,
Is there anything
is it?
like that?
No, it's
No,
more to do
no.
with a kind of a drug, isn't it? It's a drug.
Yeah, well, those that take it ought to be ashamed of themselves.
According to The Sun, there were
Thousands of empty ecstasy wrappers littering the floor of the 250-foot-long hangar.
Drugs, sex, sensation.
Some newspapers have called acid house music a sinister and evil cult which lures young people into drug taking. The message is certainly getting across.
the organisers kept the location secret until the very last moment, which was the main reason, according to the papers, why there were so few police here and they were unable to act.
Drug-crazed kids, some as young as 12, boogied for 8 hours yesterday at Britain's biggest ever ecstasy bash.
The party took place here, infiltrated by reporters from the Mail and the Sun.
There's meant to be a drugs-related craze.
What do you know about acid house music?
It must affect the brain in some way.
Unless
or
it's
other.
just the music that
Must
does
be.
it. Who
All
knows?
them lights flashing don't do you any good either, do it? I wouldn't even go in the pub where them lights are.
Oh, no,
They drive you
no.
mad, don't they?